Not familiar with Matisse.
The way, because
We all sort of know about him, right?
Yeah, to use them for next year.
My
Sarah.
personal favorite.
I,
I'm sure we could redo that. We should say something at the end.
And I don't know if any of you saw the cutouts show at Modern Art. I think it was it last year?
Yeah, it was last year.
No, it was 2014 actually. It was a while ago, but
No, I was last year.
I thought it was last year too. I don't know why this was.
But
anyway,
I took my
insert
kids. It was
instead
a
of both.
mistake.
Why?
It was just so
Good idea.
busy and
Oh,
they were grouchy. It just didn't work out well.
it's like, you know, you take your kids to a play and you think, oh, they're gonna love it. I took my kids to see War Horse, which cost a fortune at the time. And it, you know, at intermission, I said, so what do you think? My son was like, boring, let me out. You know those little horses? They
And
always.
she goes back to
no.
So anyway, I'm gonna pass this around so you get a sense of what Matisse did with cutouts at the end of his life, even though we're gonna talk about Icarus later, but you know, you can sort of take a look at that.
And let us know when you want us to talk about the project. Just tell us when we can. If you want to do it in between or. I gave you the project that we're doing, right?
Yes.
So, okay.
Yeah,
So
which
whenever
I
you
really-
feel it's appropriate, let us know.
I like it. So last time, you know, this curriculum has been written different ways depending on what Diane was thinking at the time. And sometimes it's a Picasso canvas and a Matisse canvas, or sometimes it's Picasso in one session, which is what we did, and Matisse in another. And both are really appropriate because they are the two pivotal figures of modern art. And you want to remind kids, you know, what are we doing today? We're doing learning to look. What are we studying in learning to look? We're looking at art. What kind of art are we looking at this year? And for kindergartners, it's their first time. But remember that we told them we're looking at modern art. What is modern? When something is modern, what is it? It's new. It's different from what was before. So while this still sort of is, it's referred to as modern art. You go to the Museum of Modern Art and you will see these canvases. Today, art has moved beyond, and sometimes it's hard for any of us, but children, to realize how radical things were in their time. So we looked at Picasso, and they looked at the portrait of Maya with, you know, two noses and one eye facing forward and one to the side, and this idea of looking at multiple viewpoints at the same time was very radical, because for those of us who have done this over time, and we've looked at Ingres and David, and we know how there was an impulse to recreate reality, and there was a desire to take this flat surface of the canvas and the picture plane and create a sense of reality and a sense of depth and of perspective. And now we have artists that are taking all of those cherished rules and modalities of creating images and really sort of breaking with them and doing things in a modern and new way. And that's what we looked at with Picasso. And today we're going to look at it with Matisse. And Picasso and Matisse had this love-hate relationship. And actually, to say love-hate is wrong. It's love-envy. I mean, they really looked to each other and they really inspired each other. They stole from each other. Although one would say that they wouldn't use that term. But I think I mentioned last time that when Picasso started to get interested in African and Iberian imagery, which is, you know, much more primitive and older, it was something that he actually sort of picked up on from Matisse. Matisse was the first to start collecting these African masks. So they were a constant inspiration to each other, and they understood each other better than any other two artists at the time.
Yeah.
And they were constantly innovating and sorry, everybody.
Sarah wanted to make an entrance.
What happened?
I haven't figured out how to be quiet. I'm sorry.
No, he's fine. All right. Do you have anything to say for yourself?
What happened?
She saved a puppy, a baby, and
I was skiing down a 43rd.
A sheer
Sheer
face.
cliff. Yeah, exactly.
Double X.
A lot of trees. And what are you gonna do?
Anyway, so they are really the two pivotal figures of modern art. Today, modern art, the genie has been let out of the bottle. There's no going back. Art, virtually anything can be classified as art. But it's these two figures that really turned art on its ear and broke with conventional wisdom and academic methods to give us something entirely new. And they each had their own, individual goals. Picasso is more closely associated with Cubism, and Matisse was called the father of the Fauves. And the Fauvism is a term that was coined by an art critic who went to look at an exhibition of the Independence that Matisse was exhibiting in with some other artists, Andre Derain and Maurice Flameng and some others. And he said the color was so arbitrary and shocking, and there were some sculptures there, and he said, and there was a sculpture of Donatello's, and he said it's like Donatello is standing amongst the Fauves, which are the wild beasts, because this color was so outrageous and unlike anything we'd ever seen before. Even with the Impressionists, who used color in as we know, a new, not exactly, realistic kind of way. And I'm going to show you some of what it is that was found to be so radical at the time. The color that was so revolutionary. This is a very famous painting of Matisse's, a perfect fauve canvas. And you can see here why this would be considered shocking at the time. Today we're used to these kinds of departures, but the color, her face is green. There's the famous portrait of Madame Matisse with a green stripe down her nose that Leo and Gertrude Stein famously bought. And I'll pass this book around so you can look for yourselves, but also the colors that we look at today and the canvases that we're looking at today. For example, this is not what we were used to, in the Academy, at the Académie des Beaux-Arts. And you will see also that one of the hallmarks of Matisse's work that we're going to see in the work that we look at today are these vast expanses of flat color. And this is something.
That's not Fauvistic.
This is Fauvistic because the color is radical. Why do you think not?
Because I thought you said it meant beastly.
No, well, no. It's like, when the Impressionists were called the Impressionists, it wasn't meant to be complimentary. It was, wallpaper makes a better impression. And these are fauves, and that's because their color was wild and spontaneous and, unusual for the time. I mean, to color these figures in this red, is rather arbitrary and shocking. It's emotional. The color is used emotionally and arbitrarily. And Matisse said, I have no theory when I'm working. I'm conscious only of the forces that I'm using, and the idea that drives me is one that is gradually revealed to me as it develops in the act of painting my picture. To expose oneself to what one wishes to portray, to approach it from every angle until I feel possessed by it, and I am drawing its traits not from the outside, but rather an observation, but rather from deep within myself, retaining only what cannot be seen. To paint a tree, one must feel oneself to be growing in that tree. Color is nothing if it does not agree with the subject and if it does not increase the impact of the painting through imagination. So we can turn to this canvas here. Originally, when Matisse painted this canvas, he actually painted it with a green background, but it didn't resonate with him, so he repainted it with the red. So we can start by saying, what is it that we see here? What do we see? Are we looking at a portrait of a person?
No, the room.
A portrait of a room? A painting of a room? So what would we call a painting of a room? Well, it's like a landscape, but it's not outside in nature in the land, so it's exactly what this is. Yeah, it's an interior scene. It's an interior scene. And it's an interior scene that has a lot of elements in it. Can anybody guess what kind of room this might be?
The studio.
A studio, exactly right. And the name of this painting, what would you think it might be? The studio, any other adjective? The red atelier, the red studio. It is actually the red studio, and it is the studio of the painter who painted it, and that painter's name is Henri Matisse. Henri Matisse came from a relatively, prosperous bourgeois family. His father was dead set on him practicing law. He did study law. He did not like law. Anecdotally, it's said that he had appendicitis, and while he was recuperating, his mother bought him a set of paints, and he found that he had a real appetite and a talent for it. And although he did work as a law clerk for a period of time, he was very unhappy about it, and he convinced I don't know if he ever convinced his father. His father was always somewhat upset that he didn't pursue a more bourgeois path and stay with the law, but he did eventually convince them to allow him to study art, which he did. He studied with Bouguereau at first, who Monet also studied with, and then subsequently moved on to the studio of Moreau, who was one of the symbolist painters. And at the start, a lot of his works were very conventional with a darker palette. And like Picasso, Matisse had a whole host of skills. He didn't paint this way because it was how he could paint. He chose to paint this way. And I had a final exam, I remember, where the professor would show slides and you had to identify the painter, and he craftily inserted one of the earlier works by Matisse that no one could identify as recognizably Matisse, but it was, I guess, a lesson that, Matisse's talent, like Picasso's, ran the gamut. So he eventually was, exposed, of course, to Seurat and the Pointillists and to the Impressionists, and his color canvas lightened, and then he went far beyond anything that the Impressionists did in his use of color. This canvas, what's unusual about it? Anybody have any thoughts? Do you think his studio was actually this color red? So when we talk about the elements of art, what element jumps out at us as one that is particularly prominent in this one?
Color.
Color. Color is emotional. Color has, you put colors against each other because they have an effect upon one another. Complementary colors make other colors jump out. So this is a red studio, but it doesn't, is it a frightening red? What is the sense or the feeling that you have from looking at this red room? Happy, sad, scary? Is it blood red?
I think it's happy.
It's happy. It's actually, what's interesting about it is that it's very thinly applied red, so it's not this deep saturated. You get a sense that there's something else besides the red. It's on a white canvas. The other thing is there are lines created here, and these lines, and it actually is a testament to Matisse's great ability. These lines are not painted on the canvas. These are actually called reserve lines. What Matisse did was to paint up to the line that he created, and these lines are actually the canvas unpainted below showing through. Yeah, which is really, when it becomes all the more amazing. I mean, for something, this, the way this is,
it was just, he didn't scrape it off?
No.
It was really just...
No, it's called a reserve line where he would paint right up and up to it.
I just find that, at first glance, it looks sort of two-dimensional, very flat, but these lines really create so much depth.
Ooh, that's such an because this canvas is enormous. Aside from the fact that it gives us a glimpse, it's autobiographical in the sense that it gives us a glimpse of many of Matisse's other works. So it's sort of like a self-portrait in a way through his objects. And when we talk about color and color associations, and red is obviously a warm, passionate, hot color. It's not reserved and cool like a blue, or like the green that he apparently originally started with. So maybe and this was painted roughly around the time his father had died. So maybe Matisse is like actually giving us an insight into his own thinking about his work and about his art, that it is infused with intensity and passion and love, but it's not a violent, scary red. We can say, I saw red, I was so angry, or the stop sign. It could be more of the love red, you know, the red of the rose petal or something. There's something non-threatening but highly emotional about the red that is in this particular canvas. And you mentioned the idea of depth. Now, we're talking about modern art again, and we're, you know, talking and thinking back to what we saw with Picasso, where the images are very flat and artificial. And this started with Cézanne, who said he wanted to reduce all of nature to its elemental shapes, to cubes and squares and cylinders. And so this canvas has it all. There is this sense of flatness in it. I mean, because what you have is an overall color field, but if we, first of all, where's the door or anything? We're really in this room. We're immersed in this room with Matisse, and where do we get a sense of depth, you know, in this painting, if we get one at all?
The left side, the line of the room.
The left side, now, so if I were to cover half the canvas, would you have a sense of depth anywhere? No, because this side of the canvas doesn't have these telltale lines that give us a sense of depth. Okay, so on the left side of the canvas you have, but just the way Cézanne did when we looked at some of his still lifes, where you would have oranges or apples on a table, the table would be somewhat leaning forward. It would be impossible for these actual pieces of fruit to defy gravity. They would be rolling off. We would, in Cézanne canvases, we would see the top of a bowl as well as the front of a bowl. So that was the beginning of this multiple perspectives at one time that both Picasso and Matisse played with, and particularly in this canvas. So the left side of the canvas does still adhere to some sense of depth, but it's not a realistic one. There's no attempt here to replicate the actual space. It's an artistic rendering of this room. So there is some sense of depth along this wall here, and this canvas, which he subsequently destroyed for some reason, I'm not sure why, is leaning up against this wall here, and then it continues and sort of fades away. And the table, you know, what's so interesting about this, as I said, this reserve line and painting up to the line, is that you have the table reflecting the room underneath it. Ordinarily, we would have the table and it would block out the color field behind it. But Matisse instead just gives us the reserve line and gives us the sense of the object. The objects are less important. What's important in this room is what? The art, the works itself. So I'm going to show you some of these actual canvases. There's a list of the canvases, and if you use the whiteboard when you're in the classroom and you want to conjure up some of these paintings, the Lux Calme et Volupté and these sculptures, the Serpentine sculptures, all of these works are works that were done by Matisse himself. Also, so in this canvas, most of these things are created by Matisse himself. They're his recreations of what it is that he sees. This is the one thing that is somewhat organic, and this motif of the nasturtiums that are curving around, if you're familiar with Matisse's work, you will see a lot of these things recurrently. It's just like when we look at Vermeer, you see a lot of the same elements that are repeated in the work. The same is true of Matisse. You know, sometimes it's the goldfish bowl. There are certain motifs that he repeats throughout his canvases. So we've discussed the fact that color is one of the primary elements that Matisse is using in this canvas, and color is one of the primary elements that we associate with Matisse. He was a fauve, and you can say to the kids that he was the one that sort of initiated this movement of using color in a very personal and emotional way. And then, you know, you might show them the canvas of Madame Matisse with the green nose and things like that. The other thing is, how does Matisse structure this composition? How does your eye follow the elements of what's in the canvas?
I guess sort of circular.
Yeah, it perfectly circular. I mean, right here in the center is a clock which has no hands. So we basically, our eyes supply the, you know, the hands of the clock by sweeping the room in a circular way. You have the clock here, and then your eye could start anywhere and just move around the room in a circle. And what shapes does he use in this canvas? Mostly many rectangles, but within the rectangles there are other shapes. Okay, there's the rectangle of the two-dimensional flat canvases, as well as this two-dimensional flat canvas. There's the rectangle from the table, from the chair. There's also the element of, you know, while I'm saying that this is considered in some ways a self-portrait for Matisse, you know, he has the implements that he uses. What are these here? Anybody have a sense? Those are his crayons, his Conte crayons that he uses to sketch when he's laying down a canvas. So, and in some ways that's him, that stands in for him, the artist, and these are the products of his work. I'm going to show you some. So let's talk more about the shapes. So we have a lot of the rectangles that come from the canvases themselves, the empty frames. You have the circular element of the clock. The composition of the canvas is circular, although you don't see that. There are other circular elements in the plate in the front here, the curve of the figure on the plate, the shape of the goblet over here, the circle here, the reflections, the vase itself. So there's a lot of curvilinear, organic, sort of natural shaping here. There are the sculptures that he himself did, which are very sinuous and serpentine, a lot of curved lines. Within the canvases that he paints himself, what kinds of lines can you detect? Geometric?
No, diagonal.
Well, you see diagonals. Yes, there's implied diagonals, which give you a sense of movement and energy, but also a lot of curvilinear lines and just organic, you know, living, voluptuous shapes. And Matisse was of the belief that art, I'm misquoting him, but it was something like art should be like a comfortable armchair. It should be to enhance the quality and to recognize the beauty of life. Let me show you some of these actual paintings. Now, I know that, you know, we don't like to look at nudity with the kids for the most part because that usually sets them off, but it was all about like sinuosity, voluptuousness, both in his sculptures and in his paintings. He also, you know, people would tend to dismiss him as being decorative, and he said there's nothing wrong with being decorative. He said art should be decorative. He traveled widely and was influenced by what he saw. This is based on some scenes that he had seen in the Middle East. And there are the goldfish that reoccur in a lot of his canvases. Let me show you. Okay. For example, here we have again, like, you know, the same vase with a cutting of plants growing out of it. Let me show you the sailor. And so here is the version of that canvas that we see at the top.
I think that's in the Met.
Well, there's more than one, and I think this might be. Oh, wait a minute.
Oh, yeah, I see.
Well, this one actually, this book was written a while ago, but it's in a private collection, lucky them. But there are several versions of this. There's the study for it, you know, which he used the crayons for, and then there's this version. And I think there's a small version of this in the Met. Let me show you. Let me see. All right, so let me just give you another example of how red can be used and where it has a less calming effect. And you see the red of this. This was, I think this is in the Hermitage because it was done for Sergei Shulkin, who was his Russian patron. And Russia actually has an unbelievable trove of Matisse paintings. But do you see a difference? Do you see, how the red in this one is much more confrontational and, and glaring, as opposed to, it's funny to say this, but in a way there's a soothing aspect to this red. And if you were to see the actual canvas, the idea that it's so thinly applied, and then, so much so that then, the lines of the unfinished canvas beneath can peek through, is quite unusual. And the fact that, that he would choose to, paint this room in this way, just shows you that there's an emotional quality to the colors that we use. So when the kids do their own projects, they're not limited by trying to recreate reality. They're not trying to do anything photographic. They're doing something emotional.
Ricky, one of the things that strikes me about this picture, and I think which makes it much more interesting, is the fact that there's a big open space
In the middle?
in the bottom middle.
Well,
It's in a lot of his paintings, but it would be, if that was filled with more paintings, it would be so all over and so much less interesting. It sort of draws my eye to that open space.
It's not, that's, actually I wanted to talk about, later on, if we talk about Rothko and other things. This idea, it starts with Gauguin, who we don't really cover in Learning to Look, but others as well, Cézanne, Gauguin. This idea of flat expanses of color was, as you see, was new. I mean, it would be radical to have every inch covered with canvases. Then it would become a much more Picasso-esque, distorted sort of perspective. But this idea of flat washes of color is definitely a modern hallmark. And then when you think about contemporary artists, you think about the color field painters like Barnett and Rothko, or even Milton Avery. This gets started at this time. And I'm just going to say that the influence of these painters on future painters that come along can't be, underestimated. This is about Mark Rothko. He got help from Matisse in the 1949 Red Studio. When it entered the Museum of Modern Art's collection, Rothko went to see it over and over again. He was a thunderstruck pilgrim. Matisse's painting abolished volume and completely reinvented pictorial space. Venetian red covered the entire field. No help was given to the eye as to where the floor ended and the wall began. Objects themselves, a window, a decorative plate, paintings, float without discernible volume upon the red field. The third dimension, which for centuries was the whole illusionist point of painting, had simply been waved away. But far from emptying the painting of any drama, the transformation actually intensified it. And there's some other stuff in there. But this idea of that color, this flat field of color can absorb you and emotionally affect you, starts with these painters, with Picasso and Matisse, specifically Matisse in this case. So again, I just want to try and do that exercise again. If you eliminate some of these lines here, you would have the idea that this is a completely flat, non-perspective, canvas. But so Matisse gives you a little help. On the left side, he does give us these lines here that pull our eye, but there's no line here, that would seem to be appropriate in the corner of the room, that there should be a line here. He only goes so far with that. And he sort of helps us out too, because the canvas is right there in the corner. But the truth is, if you eliminate this canvas is just like hanging out there at an impossible angle. So this is what we mean when we're talking about the modern aspect. This idea, that traditional perspective doesn't have to exist anymore, that we can bring our own perspective to it. And what he does instead is sort of direct our eye around in a circle. Don't waste so much time thinking about conventional recreation of reality. And what's the most important thing in this canvas? What's the thing that jumps out at us? The actual works of art themselves, the things that he cares the most about. And so in some ways, this red studio is a valentine to his love of painting his love of color, and his love of art and what he did. And he was, I guess finally, they say, somewhat psychologically liberated by the fact that he was freed from the disapproval of his father. But that's, you know, Freudian backdrop. We don't have to get into that. I will try and find some more of the actual canvases that are shown here. But in terms of the elements of art, and the most important one is clearly color. And then there's the element of shape and line. And so we have a lot of, you know, geometric shapes from the canvases, which again reminds us that the canvas, the painting, is a man-made thing, where you have more curvilinear lines and things, or where you have the organic, naturalistic things, the nasturtiums, and somewhat over here in the ceramics that he made. But I do think it's interesting to point out to the kids that, like Picasso, Matisse could do anything he wanted to. He could paint something very realistic, but he chooses to paint in this emotional, liberated, modern way. And these things, though, you know, are very flat. They're not, the idea of volume is, I mean, we know it because intellectually we know that this has to be somewhat rounded. But the only place he really gives us a sense of that is here with this goblet. Otherwise, these things are very flat and volumeless. And the other fact that he painted up to these lines, these reserve lines that he created by not painting, I mean, gives you another insight into his incredible dexterity and his ability. But again, within the canvases themselves, where you have human, you know, you have the body itself, the figure, the lines are very organic and curving and sinuous and beautiful.
What do you think the impact is of using those reserve lines as opposed to like white or, you know, beige paint?
It is a great question, and we can discuss it. It's first of all, it's a testament to his talent and to his compositional abilities, how he laid it out and did that. But I think there's this sense of sort of like the ghostliness of objects, that the objects are kind of beside the point, you know, that they're there, but they're not there. They're not actually painted in. They exist and they serve some function, but they're not what's important. What's important are the things that he turns his attention to and, you know, meticulously, you know, like patterns and recreates, not in a photographic way, but, you know, in a very colorful and emotional way. Are you going to be comfortable talking about this with younger kids?
Which aspect of it?
Well, no, like I know, like I've sort of rambled. You know, the thing about Matisse and Picasso is that they're so gigantic that.
You have to pick and choose.
Yeah, so exactly. So you'll pick and choose, and when you know, we're going to focus on what was most important to Matisse in this canvas, and clearly color was one of those things.
I find these paintings, the kids are so excited about them. At least our fifth graders.
Fifth graders?
They bring so much to it. I mean, I feel like I don't get to, they shape more of what we talk about than I do.
And
you know, I mean, I come to it with what I would want to say, but then what their reaction
well,
is.
that's
what
the best part.
helps
If you
me
get that,
decide
the
what to tell
interact,
them.
like what's your, what feeling do you get from looking at this
I mean,
painting?
they're gonna love this.
So
They're
what?
gonna be like,
So it's a, you know, how do we think Matisse felt when he was in this space? He was
For
happy.
younger kids, I understand what you're saying. I mean, could you talk about it for younger kids more like, even though it's not a collage, but it kind of because there's lots of different pieces that are in a painting. I mean, that he kind of he's looking at a room, which a room kind of looks like a collage. It's
Okay, so what's the most important thing in this canvas? Color. What, you know, what do we think is unusual about these colors? Well, specifically the room. Does anybody really think that his studio was this color? And then somebody might say, yeah, it could have been. And then you might say, well, for an artist, it might be distracting to actually have a red room. That artists typically want a blank space to, you know, a well-lighted blank space to let their ideas come forth. But in a way, this painting is something of a self-portrait about Matisse. He loved his art. He loved painting. And you can see that in this room, the things that he spent the most time on are, you know, recreations of some of the works that he did.
Also, there's
those
no
empty frames up there.
Yeah,
That's cool.
this is an empty frame, these could be
Yeah, I
empty
like that.
canvases or mirrors, they're not.
So just things
Sure.
like anticipation too.
Yeah, anticipate it.
Of
You
your
know
works
what?
to come.
Yes, like it's an illustration of his productivity. The fact that he did do ceramics, that he did do sculpture, here are his brushes, the tools that he used. So these are the presence of the artist. You don't see him there himself, but you see his output. You see what drove him in life, and art did drive him in life. And there's another canvas, I'll look for it in there, where it's more cubist in the way it looks. It's less, obviously, you can't pull things apart exactly this way, but there's an artist palette and a thumb, and that's the stand-in for Matisse again. The art is Matisse. He is one and the same with his work. And for a long time he had to struggle with that because his father was not happy about it, and at one point, cut him off. Just some interesting biographical information about Matisse. Like Picasso, he was pretty apolitical, and really just, his religion and his politics were art. But his wife and his daughter were both very active members of the resistance and were actually arrested by the Gestapo. And his daughter actually escaped going to Ravensbrück because there was an air raid drill at that time, and she managed to get away. And while he paints his wife many times, he also painted models with whom he had a lot of liaisons, and so ultimately they separated. But at this, but in any case, he was an interesting figure because you have Picasso, who was walking around in his striped sailor shirt and having, very visible liaisons and affairs and painting about the women he was involved in. But if you were to see Matisse, he looked like a lawyer, and they used to call him the doctor because he always wore a suit, and he had a neatly trimmed beard, and he wore little spectacles and stuff, and he looked very respectable and bourgeois, and anything but, what his art might have communicated to us.
Did his paintings sell well in his lifetime?
Yeah, obviously with all of these artists, there were some people who got it and wanted it, and there was a period of time where he didn't do as well, but then ultimately he did, have a following, and the Steins were wonderful, and in fact, they used to buy one from Picasso, one from Matisse, and sort of pit them against each other, and there was this, the thought is that Picasso wouldn't have been Picasso without Matisse, and Matisse would not have, although Matisse seems much more inner-driven, but Matisse was also provoked by Picasso. They had this unbelievable mutual admiration and jealousy of each other.
So the Steins hung the paintings across from each other?
They would hang, wherever they hung them, they would just buy one from him and then buy one from him, and then, you'd be waiting, and then, Picasso would do the portrait of Gertrude to try and get in her good graces and stuff. But they were very influential upon one another. And I'm sorry.
What time did they both die? Around what time?
Matisse, I always think about this because he died in 1954, and Picasso died later. He lived longer. Matisse, as we're going to see in the next canvas, where he turned to the cutouts, was very sick at the end of his life and couldn't really paint with brushes anymore, and so that's why he turned to the cutouts, which is, genius. And these artists, a lot of them, like Renoir, also had to have, and they had their brushes strapped to their hands at the ends of their lives, even if they couldn't see, or they couldn't get out of a wheelchair. They just had this impetus to continue creating and producing them, and it's extraordinary.
Picasso was 1973.
Yeah, Picasso was 90, I think, when he died, and I think Matisse was maybe in his 70s, 85.
They said a couple of months short of 85.
But he was ill, and,
1860,
Yeah, there's something very alive about this painting. It's, to me, it's almost, when I first looked at it, there was a lot of, the paintings were actually almost moving. It's almost like it was pulsating.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear. Because that is the idea, is that it is full of life and energy, and that was
And if you think of the
important to
color,
the
it's
teeth.
almost like blood red and pulsating.
Well, it's, I want to say it's not blood red in
Well,
like
not
a
right.
horror movie way,
No,
but
no,
in
no, but-
in a life form kind of
Right,
way,
a
because
life force.
it is thinly applied, and you get a better sense of that in the actual canvas than in this kind of a reproduction. But, you know, the fact that the actual canvas peeks through, this idea, all of these artists were doing things that hadn't been done before. Matisse and, Picasso and Braque were making collage elements, taking things from the real world and slapping them onto canvases, which was like breaking a wall, you know, to bring the real world into your canvas. And Cézanne and Impressionists were starting to leave unfinished parts of their canvas or letting the canvas show through, because they are saying, this is a painting. This is not a recreation. This is an invention. In fact, some woman once made a criticism to Matisse that the woman's arm is much too long. And he said, "Madam, that is not a woman. That is a painting." You know, and you know, and that's what they're doing. They're calling attention to the fact that this is a composition. This is something that you know, as he said in this, you have to invest yourself and become part of what it is you're painting. And also, I mean, it's before the Surrealists, but this whole idea of, and we'll see it with Miro and other painters, and Dali, of surrealism, of like tapping into what's in you and then putting it on the canvas. Sometimes that's not the case here. There is forethought, there is composition, there's this idea, I'm painting my studio, but that things emerge from you. You know, it's not that you're going and looking at something and trying to recreate that. Even with Impressionists, when, you know, they would go out and you know, Monet would create the water lilies with his own sense of the colors and how they were affected by light. He was recreating something, you know, that he wanted you to grasp the reality of. Anyway, so it is interesting to say to kids, like, let's cover up this part, and then it looks completely flat. And so the other thing I want to stress is that both Picasso and Matisse were into sort of the primitive in art, in getting back to simplifying and not creating the shawl of Madame Leblanc by Ingres, where you meticulously recreate the reality. They were simplifying, they were attracted to the more primal aspects of art, like African masks and things like that. And I think that when we talked about Rousseau, I told you that Picasso held a dinner for him, and part of it was sort of poking fun at Rousseau, who stood up at that dinner and said, Picasso and I are the greatest artists. But you know, Rousseau was a very provincial tax collector who had never left France, hadn't really studied art except self-taught and going, you know, and observing from nature in the zoo and things like that. But what they appreciated about him, it was this naive quality, and his ability to express that naive quality on the canvas. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with outsider art today. There's a big festival usually every year at the Piers, but outsider art is art that is created by very often poor, poor, unlettered, uneducated people in rural or economically depressed areas, people who just are given the, cardboard boxes and the barest of implements. And I mean, look it up, because it's really quite amazing what some of these artists produce without, academic training and all this other stuff. This raw impulse that comes from within to create imagery, and very often it is simple, primal, naive, flat, without the tricks of the eye that more educated artists would have. And there's something to be appreciated in that and, admired. So anyway, so we'll leave it at that. But I think, when you say to the kids it's a red, but it is like, like a love red, like the red of a rose, like a Valentine, something like that. I know we don't talk about Valentine's Day, but it's very hard. My birthday's Halloween, and I never know. But anyway, so And you might tell them that this was originally, he started with green, but it didn't work, it didn't resonate, it didn't convey what he wanted to convey. So he was using color emotionally.
Can we break for a minute to talk about the
Yeah.
project and mention about the trips and stuff like that, and then
All right, you know, Jane, actually, this is Jane's project that she did. It was after the holidays, and we were feeling, and it was such a great project. We'll just
Well, it
put
was,
out.
it came from the book. It didn't really.
Well, whatever. It was yours, and it was fabulous. If you guys want to just pass them down, I have one for you too, Phyllis. So do you wanna actually talk about how it worked for you, or do you want me?
I can't remember.
Okay. All right. So
I mean, once I read it, then I'll remember.
No,
No, it's fine. I mean, listen,
I feel
it's
like
pretty
6 years.
self-explanatory. We got this time.
And it relates more to the second one.
It was-
Oh, where is the second one?
We don't
there,
have
that
it.
one is turned over.
Oh, good. I thought we didn't have it. That's
Did
great. You went downstairs to get it.
Did they get printed paper? Yeah.
All right. So if you guys see,
Did everyone get one?
yeah, they have enough back there.
Okay.
I gave one for everyone in that,
Oh,
in that
okay.
room. Oh.
I split them.
Oh, okay. All right, so we're gonna work on this painting here. What is this one called?
Icarus.
Icarus, right. So we bought origami. This one's pretty easy as far as supplies go. We bought origami paper. A lot of the older kids have glue sticks. I think glue sticks would be easier, but we'll still leave the glue mixture in the boxes just in case, because it's there. And I think we'll actually leave all the other cut up paper that we have already. We have cut up tissue paper and cut up.
Just use the
But the point
origami
is-
paper.
Yeah,
Don't
right.
use other
Otherwise
paper.
it becomes all
It's such a
fungible.
mess.
Okay.
No,
And the
it's
point
also
is to
everything
cut
looks
it, that's
the
like
same.
the sort of
Yes, the
painting
yeah.
of it.
Okay, so we will not be using any of it.
Sorry, I know
So we
we
will
both
be
do
using
that.
origami paper. So we'll put a mixture in. So pretty much the origami paper that we have is for all of the projects. So just don't put every single thing out. You know,
Please
we'll.
spare, it's expensive.
Yeah,
It's
it's-
origami paper.
Can I just
so-
tell you what I did?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I knew I was going to say
No, I want you to.
What I did to prepare, and what took a while with this, was separating the papers
Oh,
and
God.
making a mix of papers so that there was really a nice choice for the
Right.
children. And I would do what you did with the other projects where you said this is for 5X, this is for 5Z, this is 5W.
You like that?
Yes, if you
Did that work for
can,
you?
if you can, I know it's like, it would be like 20, separating them out so that you have enough supplies and that we use it sparingly.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's a good idea. You know, we'll
You're probably going to do that already, but I'm just
maybe.
saying.
We were maybe
when
going to
did the
do that.
project start? When
Mon-
does this project?
Monday.
Monday.
Next Monday.
Okay, so there's none this week. Like last time there was some like the next
If
day.
there's anyone this week, there are a couple that needed to go from the last time.
Oh, right.
And can I make a general announcement that if, especially for the project management, like if you didn't teach your class last time, Rachel just mentioned this week, to please let us know because otherwise things are gonna get turned over.
Right. So I went to the ELC today and I was going to grab the box, but I didn't have a chance to look to see
There's
how
two
many.
ELC
There's 2 or 3.
Two.
Two?
Two that I know of,
Okay.
put it that way.
All right. So we'll figure it out after. And once we decide what we're doing with the boxes and with the supplies, we'll just send an email to everyone to let everyone know where everything is. Just, you know, especially the ELC classes or the classes in, you know, the academy that haven't gone yet. We'll let everyone know what the supplies are. Probably like we've done before. I went to the ELC classes and gave the teachers the supplies that they needed, just so they had it. And it'll either be there or just in a separate area, and I'll let you guys know. We'll let you know where it is. So.
But I would also, I mean, I made a bunch of, I may even have them still. The examples that I made, I may actually have them at home still.
Okay.
Because it's nice to show the kids. I know we don't like to do too much demonstration because it takes away their creativity. But I think if you want them to understand kind of what Matisse did,
Uh-huh.
to show them how they can fold to get symmetrical
Uh-huh.
things, how they can use what they cut out. They can also use what they left behind. You know, when they cut something
Yeah.
out, there's the negative space, and I did that. Like if you look at the one on the upper left, you see there's like
Yeah.
the papers that were cut out and then the papers that I cut out from. I don't know. So that was.
And also, for a lot of people, there's a very limited amount of time. So just to the
Yeah.
extent we can kind of get their juices flowing, it might be
Right.
And to compose it before they stick it.
Yeah.
Because part of this project is also the composition of it, right? And to figure out how you want to place it to create the look that you want to create.
Okay, so that's a good thing to say, just to before you use the glue, put everything down first.
And also, since, you know, like if you can give them examples of the fact that, you know, Matisse, I mean, obviously.
Wasn't always symmetrical.
You know, yes, I mean, lots of, sometimes the shapes are more involved and convoluted, you know. He said that when he cut with the scissors into the paper, it was like he was sculpting, you know, with scissors. But, you know, the way he did it went in any number of directions. I mean, here you've got these kind of more squarish, you know, geometric shapes. Here you have the more organic, anthropomorphic shapes, you know, that look like, you know, seaweed or some sort of, you know, kelp, right, exactly.
And it doesn't always need to be symmetrical. I think,
No, it doesn't.
Symmetry is really cool too,
You know.
but you know, sometimes.
It's just some kids have made
Asymmetrical.
paper dolls. They've made paper dolls, they've made those snowflakes that you hang up. So they might have had experience already of cutting out
Cutting it.
and what's that like. So just they might be able to reference that when they go.
Right, that they should let themselves take over, like tap into their own, you know, artistic feeling. Oh, you know, and you were asking about whether he was popular, and I wanted to say that he did have, you know, the patron of Sergei Shulkin in Russia. You know, if you go to the Barnes Foundation, you'll see that there's an enormous piece that actually he had to do twice because they mismeasured. But he did have a following, and he did have the signs championing him. And so then you had a lot of Americans coming over, like the Coen sisters. If you go to Baltimore, they have an unbelievable collection, the Clark brothers. People were collecting his work, and he was successful in that sense. So that was fortunate. I think this is what was done. Oh no, but the thing he did for the Barnes is very similar to this. But these huge commissions and things.
All right, so I'm gonna sit down. But is there anything else that I should?
have a quick question. Our children specifically, especially.
What grade?
Fourth. They're perfectionists, and many of them don't like their work, and considering that origami paper is very expensive.
Yeah.
Can we use construction paper too?
Yeah,
Sure.
that would be the.
Well, we could put some construction. Just
Yeah, just
plain
because like,
construction
we need
paper.
more of this and more of that. I'm like,
Or can I start over?
Yes,
Yeah.
a lot of that.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you tell them from the beginning? Like,
Right, but
this
they
is
don't
a very
really like. You
limited
want to please
resource.
them,
Think.
and they don't like. They need.
Part of this is I mean, they have a studio art class, and really, where this is like what they're gonna do for the full 40 minutes. This is what they're gonna do for like 20
Yeah.
minutes here.
10.
And exactly. So part of this is them being okay with just going through the process of
We get a lot.
cutting
I
it,
don't
and
like
I can
this
make a
paper.
shape.
Yeah.
Period.
I mean, I
And
have
that
fourth,
way-
I
and
have
that-
fourth
yeah.
grade too, and some of the kids who didn't want to do it, I was just like, there was one I tried, and he didn't want it, and I was like, whatever.
Adorable, but he's
Do it,
no,
do
I
it,
don't.
you know, do
I don't
whatever you want.
collage.
This is art, you do what you
Okay.
want, but everyone else is doing this. But you know, I mean, for the
Yeah,
most part,
I've got
the
we got a
kids
couple
were-
of. We don't collage. Sorry.
So can I talk about, is there anything else in the project?
No.
Can I
No.
talk about
Are we
the
good?
trip for a minute, and so we can go to Icarus. First of all, a big thank you to Regina.
Oh no, you.
No, okay.
Who has spent already a tremendous amount of time
It's fine.
getting dates and uploading and whatever and
You make it
confirming
very easy.
from the museum. So we are our next meeting together is not going to be until March. Before that, and just say the date, and we'll put this all in an email. February 17th at 10:15 a.m. if you teach kindergarten through 4th grade for the trips. If you teach 5th grade, you please come and join us. It's a wonderful way to go. But the 5th graders are not going. I'm sorry that I'm just not going to go.
February 17th.
February 17th at 10:15 at the museum, and we'll send you details. Yes.
Just to, so you know, all the public schools are closed that week. It could be really crazy.
And yeah, I'm not even gonna be in town.
Just because that's President's Week.
I'm
Well,
just
it's
putting
just
it out
us.
there.
No, but it's our.
It's not for the kids.
Oh, it's for
just
the adults?
us
Okay.
adults.
No, our days are.
Sorry. I just
no, that's
wanted to
fine.
know.
Our visiting days start the 21st.
Actually, the 18th.
Of
The 18th.
February?
That's
February.
still
The
school,
18th.
right?
Well,
That whole.
right. So there's about a day or two
There's
that
one- there's
overlap.
That Monday.
Um, but we got all our first, they come, right, that's
Yeah,
true.
we're
I
coming
don't
in the morning.
understand.
No,
The
that whole
17th
week.
is just for the teachers?
This is, right, it's just for us to walk around
The
with
parents
the
and
pamphlet.
teachers.
Fifth grade.
To just get to know
And-
where things.
And
that-
also you can be
We are not looking
guided
at the
through the
same
route
works.
without your having to figure it out
That's
yourself.
the other thing,
Which is
that I
lovely.
just want
No, but I
everyone
think
to
the
know.
point is that it's gonna be
So-
packed.
It will
because
be
there's
packed.
no school.
There will
There's
be
no
packed.
school for the DOE
Yeah.
that week.
Okay.
And I'm not gonna be in town either, so I can't
Okay,
go.
that's fine.
But-
Okay.
We'll have a
I'll
map.
be good.
Yeah.
And you'll get an email, right? And the
We're
email
gonna
will
send
have,
an email with all the details and with
How
each
to
of
match
your
your-
things, and we're confirming with school.
This is the map.
Please understand that like it's been a tremendous amount of coordination, and we've tried to do it on days that you teach. It doesn't always work. So whatever the days are, they're gonna be set.
But it's a tour.
And if it doesn't work for you, try to find someone else who can do it. Let us know, we'll help you.
For what, with the class, you mean?
Right, if you can't, you have something on the date that your class
Right.
is set for, we, like,
It's that.
requesting another date from the museum and
Come to the
school.
museum tour, just because I might end up subbing. Like in case someone needs me to sub.
Correct, if you're right,
I'm
if you
just
teach,
gonna go.
right, if you teach 5th grade and you wanna come on the museum tour because you might be asked to sub, that's great. Too.
So the dates for the class, they're gonna be in what month?
they're at the
Between
end of
February
February
and March.
Like up for February 18th through March 10th.
Thank you. And also, one thing important to know, we are going to the Met and not to the MoMA. A lot of the works that we are studying this year are at the MoMA. But in terms of taking kids through the Met, it's
Easier.
it's an easier experience, frankly. And there are many representative works of the artists that we've studied so far and the artists that we are going to study. And that's, so we will have a guide that, just like we always do, with a map
And it'll tell you what we're looking at instead and.
right. So we'll have, this is the Red Studio. Remember we talked about this and we talked about color and line, and here hanging on the wall, I remember it at least, is the little boy on the side.
Yeah, we
Teachers
might look
using
at
the
some
same
of
elements.
the things that are
We're gonna-
contained within the canvas.
And we'll talk about that when we get
I'm gonna
to
go
the museum.
beforehand and I'll run it by you and
We
we'll
will-
see what our
yeah.
options are that, that we think fit best. But it's good for kids to know that, like last year, you sort of changed things by having them go before they've actually done the whole thing. And it's actually an interesting approach because they get both. They see the stuff that they've seen and then they see the stuff they're going to see, and both are a different sort of experience and a good thing. The idea of seeing something else by the same artist and seeing if they can recognize certain hallmark details. Like most times Van Gogh is very recognizable. He has a very obvious style. But with someone like a more protean artist like a Picasso or a Matisse, they may be surprised at what they see. So that's interesting too. Just talking about one of your more symmetric cutouts, that would be one. But he really ran the gamut. And then I just want to show you a couple of other things. I'm sorry this book is so big. But last time we looked at Maya and one of Picasso's treatments of her, and this is one of Matisse's paintings of his daughter Marguerite, the one who grew up to be in the resistance and stuff, So this idea of the very primitive, non-realistic, not necessarily, beautiful, but, conveying something emotional. And then I wanted to show you.
So some of the teachers are going this right after, the day after.
Right.
Yeah, that's okay. That's
It's good, it'll be fresh in their mind.
I want to show you some of the earlier works when I said, he could do more conventional, work. This is, in the beginning when he was still, before he'd sort of found his niche and what worked for him. But this is a much more conventional image, a much more conventional interior still life.
For the last one, I found it was really cool for the kids to see, like when I showed Picasso the Maya, the sailor, and then I showed, remember when you were talking about his
The thing he
earlier
did when he
works?
was 13.
I showed the one, I pulled that up on the board and showed the paintings when he was 13, and they were like blown away. 'Cause
Right.
They were like, oh, that sucks, that painting of the sailor. I was like, really? You don't know how much it's sold for?
That's so ugly, but it's so liberating. It is
They couldn't believe
liberating.
it. They were like, look like a kid drew it.
Right, it looks like, I could do that with my feet.
Yeah, and I I said, well, you think that? You think it looks like a kid drew this? Well, how about this? He was a kid when he painted this. What do you think about this?
Yeah,
They were
could
like,
you do that? And you know, the fact that his
so
father
cool.
said, my son has surpassed, and, you know, they anecdotally that he put away his brushes.
Yeah,
which he
that was
did.
really cool.
Okay, so here's our red studio, but here's another version of the studio, okay? Which is very different, emotional. He's making a different statement, you know? And so the choice of color and how much he wants to pay attention to perspective, but he has a lot of the same elements, a lot of the same canvases. Maybe I'll copy this for you, or I'll give you the name and you can call it up. But just the idea that on a different day, in a different mood, he communicates something different. I also want to show you, this is an earlier canvas, okay? It's called The Breakfast Room, okay? But now I want to call your attention to the one I showed you before that's in the Hermitage, of that, you know, that garish, shocking red.
It says Pompeian red is what it's called in the.
This is Pompeian red, because it's more, it's not a pure red, it's yeah,
An ancient red.
Oh, this is the one that the Steins owned, and actually I think Leo owned it, but Gertrude bought it. That's Madame Matisse with the green stripe. This is really true fauve coloring. I mean, because talk about, this side is like this turquoisey blue, this is this lavender, this orange here. I mean, totally arbitrary, you know, the green of the shadows and things like that. So this is why, you know, the movement that he kicked off that used color to communicate is called the fauves, the wild animals, because their colors were. How come I can't find it? Before it kept showing up and I didn't want to see it, and now it's like.
Then how does the definition of impressionism come in?
Impressionism precedes this, okay? The colors are supposed to be the impression that light, the effects of light create on what you're looking at. So, you know, so there is, it's the beginning of less conventional coloring, you know, of what the eye perceives, you know, that sometimes we look and we see like the radiation of light causes us to see certain optic effects. It's less arbitrary, you know, they didn't have the green nose or these completely departed from reality canvases. So it's the precursor of this. It's, you know, the fact that the impression is painted out of doors in natural sunlight, very often on white, unprimed canvases, whereas art prior to this, you know, would have the canvas primed in a dark ground, so the colors would be absorbed differently, so the colors are fresher. The Impressionists also gave us the sense of the brush stroke and of movement, and sometimes that's true, but when you have an overall background, especially in the cutouts, you know, you didn't really see the brush stroke. Matisse would paint the pieces beforehand and then cut into them and then have an assistant place them, and he would, you know, instruct them to adjust and move, and, you know, it's the beginning. It's the start of this use of color in a less photographic way, okay? And again, you know, you see the ceramics that were contained in there. Picasso and Matisse both, you know, did ceramics. I just have to find that Shulkin table piece. Do you remember it? I showed you the one in the red, you know, just the radical, you know. So same subject matter, same woman leaning over an ornate, you know, table, but this is earlier. And then there's that other, you know. And so the thing about both of them is that they start in reality, but they simplify, and there's the beginning of abstraction in what they're doing. And it's important because what we're going to be looking at as we go down the line is abstraction becoming much more a part of what artists are doing. I mean, they're always trying, in this particular course of modern art, artists are trying to distill reality down to the most irreducible elements. And so you know, when you go to the modern art, you come from this beginning thing, you know, Monet's water lilies, but then you'll go to the Russian suprematists that did white on white on white on white, and you don't, you know, like, things get so refined and so distilled to the point where they can't be abstracted any further. And then, you know, we start with reaction painters and, you know, and Jackson Pollock. But, you know, everybody takes something from the one before him. Now again, here, you know, recurrent themes, you know, the vase is here and the, you know, the undulating flowers, and he has his sculptures repeated throughout canvases. And as I said, you know, when people would try and dismiss Matisse and say to him, you're just decorative, he said there's nothing wrong with being decorative. Art should be decorative. And it should, you know, give a sense of the beauty of life. And if I don't find that painting so annoying.
But it was less simplified, all those pictures out the window where the curtains were very decorative.
Of his?
Yeah.
Well, it's...
And where the curtains had
Right,
decorative and the,
no,
and the
it-
shawls
sometimes,
and the...
yeah, look, sometimes, you know, the decorative aspects, you know, were very prominent. And yes, in a lot of his pieces, you know, the fabric, but it's not photographic. You know,
No.
it's not like the shawl in Madame Leblanc. But yes, there is a decorative, harmonious, colorful, beautiful. I mean, he wanted to convey beauty. There's no question about that. You know, again, look, now this is one of the more, I have this poster, but you know, the nasturtiums again are represented. And you know, here the ground is blue, as in this case. Now blue gives you what kind of feeling? What do we think of when we think of blue?
Cool color.
Cool, we think of water or sky. So it's a cooler color, it's not a hot, passionate color, it's more. So when we look at this, what do we think we see? We see a sky. And what else do we see in the sky? Why do you say it? Because you see stars. You see something that evokes the idea of stars to us. So it looks like a night sky. And then we see what in the middle? A figure. Yeah, well, so we see a human figure. And what color is the human figure? So why might that be? Because it's nighttime and we don't, you know, in the dark, in the night, we don't always see, you know, the actual color. It's like a silhouette. Has anyone ever heard of a silhouette? And they have. So this is the silhouette of the form of what appears to be what? A man or a boy, right? And would they be surprised to know that Matisse did not paint this with brushes? How do we think he created this? How do you think he created it? It's like collage. Because Matisse at this point in his life was failing and was ill and could no longer stand for long periods of time and paint, he still had this unquenchable desire to create, and so he would paint, you know, large sections of paper with paint, solid fields of color, which we saw was starting to happen, you know, in his earlier works, this idea of, you know, vast swaths of color. And then he would take his scissors and as he, you know, as he said, I feel as if I'm sculpting with scissors. And he would sometimes just cut in a very spontaneous way and make shapes of all different kinds, and sometimes they were repetitive and sometimes they were not repetitive. And I think it does help to maybe show some other examples of the cutouts that he did, and some of them may have even gone to the MoMA and seen that show. And then he would cut them, and then his studio assistants would apply them against you know, a large canvas that he would, you know, instruct them about placement. Move this here, move this there. So what do we think is happening to this person, this boy, in the night sky?
Dancing.
It does look like he's dancing. Well, why do you get a sense of movement? Why do we think we have a sense of movement from this?
The way his arms are.
Why? Because, well, you know, if we talk about the lines, yes, these lines are not, you know, straight geometric lines. There are some spiky lines, you know, in the stars, but there's curve, like, you know, like we're
Like
people.
a bird.
There's a very, yes, he almost looks like a bird. He has his arms out like wings, which is, in this case, very telling. And it's against the backdrop of the sky, and he's, you know, he seems to have this, you know, curved lines, you know, round lines and curving lines rock and they move and they're organic. So there's a sense, and also there's the diagonal here and his head is tilted. So he has a sense of movement. He may be floating, or he may be, you know, falling. So if you didn't know the name of this painting, what might you call it?
Falling man.
Male dancer.
Dancing boy.
Okay, but he is against the sky.
Dancer at night.
So he's dancing in the sky. So
Man
flying
dancing
boy,
at night.
floating boy, you know, falling boy, because you can tell them that this image comes from a book that Matisse illustrated after the war called Jazz. And it has a number of different plates in it. And the reason he called it Jazz is because, like jazz, it was very improvisational. It's like, you know, jazz musicians will play based around a certain theme, but then they allow themselves to wander far and near and embellish and create and invent, and it's a very unrestricted form. And so this cutting of cutouts was a very freeing form for Matisse too. This actually is based on a story from mythology, and the older kids may even know the story of Icarus, which is the name of this image. And the story of Icarus is that Icarus and his father Daedalus were imprisoned in the maze of the Minotaur, and Daedalus, being very inventive, figured out a way to make wings that would allow them to escape. Did you want to say something?
No, saying hello.
Oh, hello. That would allow them to escape from their imprisonment, and you know, he made them out of wax and feathers. And Daedalus said to Icarus, his son, don't get too close to the sun, because if you get too close to the sun with something made out of wax, needless to say, it will melt. But, you know, Icarus, as young, impetuous children are wont to do, didn't heed his father's warnings, and he did, in fact, get too close to the sun, and he ended up plummeting to earth. So you don't have to tell them the whole story, but you can say, you know, it was about a boy whose father made wings for them, and he flew up in the sky, but eventually had to come down. What else do we see in this silhouette here that calls our attention to it?
The red part.
The red. So you're saying it's a heart, and conventionally that's what we think. I mean, and if you didn't have that dot, would it make a difference?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. It reminds me of Turner when he went into you know, the gallery just before, you know, on varnishing days, just before the exhibit was about to open, and he had a seascape that was very blurry and you couldn't really tell. It was a lot of white foam from waves and mist from sky, and he put a little red dot in it which signified a red buoy, and Constable said, with one stroke of red he has killed me. You know, like one little element can change this. This is a pulsing heart. His heart is beating and racing. He's young, he's alive. You know, I don't know if Diane referenced it, but somebody once said, like, maybe he was shot, but, you know, we don't have to bring that up. But, you know, it definitely draws you to this thing, and it gives you suddenly this flat, undifferentiated form of, yes, it's anthropomorphic, you know, it's a boy, it's a human figure, has so much more vitality and so much more life and so much more energy. You know, like maybe if he had made two eyes or something, but, you know, whatever it is, he chose to make this one dot of hot red. The hot colors here are the bright yellow against this cool blue background of the night sky, and, you know, the black silhouetted form, and then this red beating, energetic, pulsing heart that our eyes are immediately drawn to. Our eye doesn't move around this canvas so much. I mean, there are the stars there punctuating it, but it's really drawn to this, like,
Why
center
do you say
dot.
it's a boy instead of a man?
You could say it's a man. You know, he could have been a full-grown man. I mean, I don't really know you know,
Okay.
but it's a male form, you know,
Okay.
and we know because of the title that it was Icarus, and Icarus was the sun. He may have been a tall son. You know, I have a tall son, but so man or boy, but it's a figure. So what kind of lines do we see? So what do we see here? We again see color. We see the saturated blue, you know, that was what happened with these cutouts. You know, there weren't brush strokes and lots of differentiated things, but it was really the placing of colors one atop another.
He used painted paper?
He painted the paper.
He would
paper.
paint it. So he would paint the paper black and then cut it out, or?
He would paint this. He would paint a black piece. He would paint a yellow piece. He would paint
Reminds me
coral
how Eric
and
Carle
pink.
Eric Carl does something similar in his.
I mean, just going back to the article about the exhibit, I mean, you know, he would paint any number of colors. You know, he didn't allow himself to be limited. Color was still, you know, a critical aspect of how Matisse communicated. So, you know, you have these colors, you have these colors. Some of the colors are just so fantastic and rich, and he did it in different ways. Like, you know, again, here's a figure, you know, but he did it in these different forms, these different shapes, these ovals and ellipses and stuff, and he would, you know, and these are stained glass windows that he created. And at the end of his life, he did the designs for the stained glass windows at the Chapel of Vence in the south of France. And here he has just, you know, more simplified shapes that he but the way he did it was to paint these colored sheets first, then cut them in the way that he was inspired to, and then, you know, arrange them in terms of composition with the aid of an assistant. So this is one of the plates that came out of this book called Jazz, where he did, you know, a whole range of subject matter. This one's based on classical mythology, but the rest aren't. It was like jazz, very free form and very liberated. It's very dramatic, you know, and the contrasts, you know, the black absorbs and you know, and retreats against this blue background, and the stars punctuate the thing, and it's very simple, but actually when you know the name of it and you can bring your own associations to that story, to it, then it becomes something else entirely. If we just look at it on the surface without knowing a name, and you know, we give it a name ourselves, we might call it any number of things, you know, boy dancing, boy flying, man flying, you know, man reaching for the stars, you know, and that's kind of the idea of these things too. You're free, you know, art, you can know the name and that tells you something, but it doesn't have to. It can be your own response to it, and that's, you know, the poem is not the poet. It doesn't have to be. We read poetry, and we're not thinking that this poet wrote this poem as an elegy to his best friend who died prematurely. We're relating it to our own lives. So we can look at art just based on the elements of the curved lines and of the primary, you know, deep, rich, you know, colors, and the shapes, the organic curving, and the fact that it's, you know, we can do the same thing, and then that's a great way to introduce the project, that we're gonna do the same thing now. You can take these colored pieces of paper and create a totally abstracted image, or you can create, you know, like some of them have seen the work of Eric Carl, like, do you want to create a snail like that? You know, like this art has gone forward, and other artists use this approach in their own way, and most kids have seen Eric Carl's work, especially, you know, your younger kids. You might want to bring an Eric Carl, you know, image of a snail or an animal in to give them an idea. Think about what you want. Do you want to do an image of your dog outside peeing against a tree? So, you know, like that, you know, what is that like? And you have like you might have a red tree if you want. You know, you don't have to make the tree brown and green. You can speak through your use of these colors and these shapes, you know. Is it a pine tree with triangles? Is it a palm tree, you know, that goes this way, which, you know, there's a lot of that in Matisse as well.
I just want to say it's very charming when you see the work and you see that he pinned the pieces into place, and you can see where he moved the little pin print.
And you know, and he.
But I don't think we should give the kids pins.
Right.
No, but as somebody said before, don't have them glue things in place. Have them think about their composition. Do they want to have, you know, something totally abstract and like the top of the tree flying in the air? I mean, like, really free yourself. It's something from within. And as we go through this curriculum, there is more about the automatic and the spontaneous, you know, the automatic drawing, and not things that come from dreams. You know, your subject matter doesn't have to be so grounded anymore, and that's really another hallmark of modernism. And when we look at work by you know, Mondrian, and he'll call it Broadway Boogie Woogie, but if he didn't name it Broadway Boogie Woogie, it could be something else, right? I mean, you know, so there's the artist creating the work, and sometimes we know what the goal or the intent is, and sometimes even if we know it, it doesn't matter. But once you slap a name on this and you say it's Icarus, it changes our perception of it. You know, he's actually plummeting to Earth, you know. But in a way, it's a story of, you know, inventiveness, Daedalus creating the wings, you know, and the father's son, and the impetuousness of youth, and you know, and it was supposed to be a cautionary tale about pride and hubris, that only the gods could fly, and you know, and Icarus, you know, as a child, you know, like some kids, you know, running into the street because you don't know any better. But that's not really relevant. You're not going to talk about that with first graders. You might talk about it with fifth graders, depending on how involved they get in this exchange. But I think, so when we walk away from Matisse, we want to talk about the fact that, like Picasso, he had an array of skills, but started to want to push art in a different direction. Started from the natural and the real, and then moved towards a simplification and you know, beginnings of abstraction. But his element of art, the element he is most closely associated with, is color, and that the movement that was somewhat short-lived, but that he is the father of, is called Fauvism, because the wild use of revolutionary color, you know, made one critic, Louis Vaucel, dub them, you know, wild animals in the way they chose color. And then if you can call up some of these other images, like, you know, Madame Matisse with the green stripe and stuff, it just drives that home. Because the thing about both Picasso and Matisse is there was so much output, you know, of various forms, between sculpture and ceramics and painting and sketching and drawing and engraving, that there's no end, you know, to what they could do. Questions, concerns? Oh, you can ask them which one they'd rather have, which one they'd rather do, you know, what would they name them if they were to, well, this was pretty straightforward, but what would they name these canvases?
The book Jazz is available at the New York Public Library.
To look at, because they're all,
To check it out. I just put it on
you can
hold.
check it out?
Yeah, so, and I did that a few years ago, remember. So if you have time to show them more images, it's always really,
You can probably come, it's
probably
hard
pull them up on
to,
the
it's hard to
internet.
get them, and they're very precious. There aren't that many of them. If someone in another school brought one in that they had
it
in
looks
their
like it's
family,
online. I mean, I just held it, so I think it's available.